Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tech Champions. I'm your host, Daniel Beaty, CTO with Auditmacs here in Jacksonville, Florida. As you know, we take time each week to sit down with thought leaders and subject matter experts in the field of technology. We love to learn about them and their mission and get their thoughts on the latest trends in the industry. We always have great guests on the show. Today is no exception. Our guest today is Rigvinath Chevala, joining us from Raleigh, North Carolina. Rigvinath, welcome to the show.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Daniel, for inviting me on the show. It does feel nice to be able to share some of my thoughts, with all the bright minds out there in the tech community. And to make it easy, I go by Rigvi. It's shorter, easier to pronounce.
Okay.
So, like Daniel mentioned, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. With my wife and two little daughters.
That's great. That's awesome. And thank you for permission. I'll call you Rigvi. It'll be a little easier for me as well. So let's start with you talking a little bit just about some of your history. And I know you're CTO at Evalueserve, but you spent a lot of time in product development and software engineering over the years. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your journey up to this point?
Absolutely. Sure. I work at a company called Evalueserve. It's an analytics research and technology firm headquartered out of Switzerland. It's been in business for 20 years, actually 20th year this year. So we're going to make a big splash about it. Just as a background, I grew up in India, in Hyderabad, same town as Satya comes from. And fortunately was introduced to computer programming, at a very early age, 10 years old. And I don't know if people remember GW Basic, if it rings a bell,
Sure.
Maybe for some old timers. But I'm the oldest of the millennials, so I'm not that old. And then I came to the U.S. To complete my master's in computer science, and never looked back since then. I got a good career progression, but then also learned quite a bit over the time. Started off as a software engineer, and then grew into some leadership roles over time.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And you talk about programming. I remember our family had a TRS-80. And we bought a program. My dad bought me a book, and basically it was me looking at the pages and typing in whatever I saw on the page, and then the purple square would appear, and then it would turn to the right. It just is super basic stuff, but that was a long time ago. So and we talked earlier in our conversation about some pretty interesting things. I'd love for you to talk to our audience about. Specifically, tell us about a little about the history of the digitization and kind of how it birthed into big data. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you just think about digitization, it didn't start very much long, but it was kind of the early 90s, right, where both small and large enterprises started realizing the benefits of computers and digitizing their internal processes. And if you think about the status quo at that time, it was largely paper-based, right? Or even sometimes non-existent. The process wasn't even documented, and mostly tribal knowledge. So you really didn't have an insight into what the organization was truly capable of. It took most CTOs and CIOs at that time almost a couple of decades, right, to usher in ERP platforms, customized applications, CRM applications, etc., to get all those paper-based workflows back into a digitized form. And of course, if you think of how it relied heavily on data entry, right? Because if you think, the process workflow step by step, and you have all this data being entered, it basically became, at some point, a new problem, right? And hey, great, everyone digitized their processes, everything's in a centralized data store. But then the new problem now was, well, there's too much data, right? What do I do with this, right? And it was both structured and unstructured as social media caught on, and other forms of integrations caught on. So, there was really no ability or even architectures present at that time to really analyze that data and draw insights from that. So that kind of gave birth to this whole big data paradigm, which kind of, again, brought in another wave of new technologies, NoSQL, data lakes, Power BI, Tableau, the visualization platforms. So this whole evolution is quite interesting.
Yeah, so you've got, I mean, that's really interesting to me. You move from paper into the digital world, that digitization process that kind of gives birth to big data, but then big data starts sort of almost begging for artificial intelligence, right? And machine learning. Can you talk a little bit about the role of AI and machine learning inside big data?
Absolutely. So again, it's a almost a parallel track. AI as a concept existed way before digitization occurred because it was applied math, statistical modeling, and machine learning was not a new concept. But just going back to the big data part, right? Even the new systems that were built for big data were obviously critical in understanding user behavior, sales patterns, statistical analysis on, things like forecasting, weather modeling, oil prices, currency, you name it. But most of these insights were based on, the data that was collected and was almost one way, right? The core issue became, how do you take this huge amounts of analysis and then funnel it back into your original digitized decision engines in a real-time fashion. So the real-time is a keyword here because most data warehouses or even the data lakes that are current generation typically take time for you to run these models and then analyze the results. But then how do you feed that back into your decision engine, right? And that's
Right.
the concept of merging or converging the big data paradigm with a real-time machine learning component, is where those two things meet.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So walk us through kind of a little bit of that history of artificial intelligence from kind of the concept of, from even the 60s. I'm thinking about, HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey that could listen to you and talk back, and to the concrete where it's become very, very real. And the numbers I'm seeing are artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to double and triple and quadruple over the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. In fact, a Gartner report recently even said that it could be 9x in the next 3 years, not even
Oh,
five,
wow.
10,
Yeah.
which is amazing. But just to kind of walk you through that, right? You're right. I mean, it's almost 4 decades even before digitization, or 3 to 4 decades before that. The reason it never took off as a mainstream set of applications is because primarily because there was lack of compute power, right, at that time. And so it just remained as a theoretical concept and still applied in to some degree, but not to the degree that you're seeing today, right? As soon as the infrastructure was commoditized and the cloud providers came in and compute became real cheap, that's when at least I see the inflection point for AI to actually gain traction. But then, it's important to distinguish, right? And I'm glad you brought that up, is distinguish between what general AI is from a narrow AI, right? Or otherwise called weak AI. Typically Hollywood portrays AI as a human-like intelligence, that has consciousness, has sentiments,
Right.
and so on. But in the context of the business, B2B or even B2C, we're all typically exposed to the weak AI side. I don't think we've made enough strides on the general side. But it's safe to say, for the purposes of this conversation, that anything that we talk about AI is within the weak AI side. And if you take daily examples like Amazon or Google, they're very great standing examples for how they leverage the power of deep learning and supervised learning to roll out amazing user experiences. Today I can just open up my Google Photos app and search for the word party. It pulls up all the pictures that with my family or friends, and there's always a cake there. So you can just look at and if you're feeling hungry. The same thing on Amazon, right? You go to Amazon, it really knows the recommendation engine, the products that it recommends that you need to look for is amazing. I mean, I think it's second to none. The main reason for these type of architectures to thrive is that there is a lot of feedback that goes back into the machine learning component. Sure, I can do a forecast that is one way and then make decisions off of that. But then how do you take the outcome of those decisions and feed it back into the original model, right? And that's where machine learning shows its power. So to me, after the whole digitization wave and the big data wave, what I see now in the next few years to a decade is a huge wave of cognitive applications.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And I love your examples there. I do quite a bit, probably too much shopping on Amazon, especially during our quarantine here. And those are great examples. We don't always think about what goes into that power when you scroll down and it says, here's the other things you probably want to buy and how accurate those are. What do you see as some of the biggest business benefits to artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think the examples I gave you are more like B2C consumer focused examples, right? But how do you map that onto the business side? I mean, you probably don't see these cool features on an ERP application. I mean now they're getting there, right? As simple as a billing application, where wouldn't it be cool if it is able to just scan an invoice or a receipt and figure out the vendor amount, due date, etc., and then just process it through, right, without human intervention, right? I mean, it does require NLP, it does require, image recognition, and then some sort of analysis in the background with big data to figure out if there's anomalies, right? So let's say you've never, you scanned an invoice, but, the invoice is for 800K, and that vendor has never, in the last 5 years, dealt with you at that amount. You could automatically flag that as an anomaly, right? Another anomaly detection technique could be in a patient information system. As you enter data, if someone just puts in garbage like, hey, a 5-year-old is 5 feet tall, you can catch that right at the time. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, no, that's great.
But at least someone can say, hey, that's LeBron, that's okay.
Yeah, right. No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, the automation's great, but you have to add the intelligence layer on top to make it actually effective, and to avoid all the human checks later on. So that's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just thinking of one more example is, if you're like a B2B, like a Jimmy John's, or maybe even let's take it one step beyond, right? Grubhub or Uber Eats, right? Maybe you can create an Outlook plugin, right? That as soon as someone in an organization creates a working lunch meeting with 5 people, what are you doing at working lunch? You're supposed to order lunch, right? So maybe the plugin just detects that based on the content of the email and figures out if it's a brown bag event or a sponsored event, and then give them options to say, hey, you just want to place a group order or whatever, right? So again, this is a B2B example where you just take it to the next level using the power of AI, in general.
Yeah, that's great. I love your examples there and your insight as well. So we're gonna get things wrapped up, but I do have one last question. Since we're Tech Champions show, I'd love to hear, what do you think is one of the top characteristics that makes a tech champion?
Yeah, I have 2 words for that. Stay curious.
All right.
It absolutely me, not just professionally, but in my general life. Once you start asking the simple, questions of why and how, you'd be amazed the amount of knowledge you will gain, even though you thought you knew it all, right? Even for the simplest of things.
All right.
So if anyone tells you that you're being annoyingly curious, I'd say you've finally become a master tech champion.
I love that. Yeah, the constant curiosity. That's fantastic. And thank you, Rigby, so much for your insights on the show today. Really appreciate it. So how could folks get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to reach out? Would it be LinkedIn or a blog, or what's the best way for them to reach you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, sure. LinkedIn is the best way. Again, hopefully you can publish my full name, and you should. And by the way, I'm the only guy with that name. You Google me,
Okay.
you will not find a person.
You're unique. All right, that's great. Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate your insights. I think the audience will really enjoy it. And thank you, audience, for joining. And again, I'm Daniel Beaty, your host of Tech Champions, and we'll see you next time.